Good morning, everyone. Today, we'll be sharing our analysis and expansion plans on the Fair Employment Agency, or FEA, which is a nonprofit focused on eliminating forced labor on domestic workers in Hong Kong and internationally. We will be discussing the partnerships and strategies to help ensure that the future is fair. Now, I'll pass the time to my colleague, Tony, who will be giving a background of FEA and some of its key challenges.
Thank you, Adrian. Fair Employment Agency, otherwise known as FEA, is a social enterprise whose vision is to set a new international standard for the domestic helper agency. It has already placed more than 5,000 migrant workers and saved an estimated $6.5 million in recruitment debt, and ultimately improved the working conditions for foreign domestic workers. Foreign domestic workers contribute an estimated $12.6 billion per year to the Hong Kong economy, which is more than the F&B and construction industries combined. The domestic helper market in Hong Kong is expected to grow to 600,000 by 2047, spurred in part by the territory's aging population. As such, the importance to life in Hong Kong and the local economy are not to be understated. Next, Johnson will discuss the structural challenges impact FEA.
Okay, thank you, Tony. So let's talk about some of the structural issue. The main driver for the continued exploitation and mistreatment of domestic workers in Hong Kong is the current mechanism of visas, which are bound to the employers. Once the visa is terminated, the worker is no longer entitled to residence in Hong Kong. As such, they may continue to work for fear of losing their job. And this fear is further driven by the fact that working in Hong Kong, a worker can generate sufficient income to support their families at home. With the average annual salary in Philippines of 23,000, while in Hong Kong, a domestic worker's minimum salary of 54,000, heavily incentivizing them to seek work in Hong Kong, while bearing any potential misdeeds or illegal actions. And next, the housing is a pain point felt by many in Hong Kong, while living space one of the scarcest and most valuable resources. Compared to other well-developed Asian regions, the average living space per person in Hong Kong is among the smallest, with only 214 square feet. The average housing size in Hong Kong is only 484 square feet, a very limited space for a 2 or 3 person family without the addition of a domestic worker. We view a growing trend for those in Hong Kong to prefer helpers to not live on site as a result of the need for a personal space and privacy. And next, there are several stakeholders conflicts that are important to consider. From the employee's perspective, the requirement is a worker to perform household chores, including cooking, cleaning, taking care of infants or elderly, and successful completion of these tasks and familiarity with the household are all positive qualities built up over time. The greatest impact for most employers is that a well-matched domestic helper is willing to work for a long period of time, and which contrasts with current agency incentives, which are to mismatch workers with employers such that replacements are more frequent, and so more placement fees can be charged to both employers and workers. From the domestic workers' perspective, they wish to get well paid while being entitled to stable employment. A fair working condition and household environment are also what they are looking for because they are closely related to their benefits. But the household conditions or the wages offered by the employers may not be that ideal, and employers' interest is typically in contrast with domestic workers. And now I'll pass the time to Yo-Yo to talk about the strategy part.
Thank you, Johnson. To counter to the 3 expansion strategies proposed by the FEA, we believe that these are unlikely to bring about the change required to magnetize cost efficient and to bring about a fair employment model. Establishing new branches in Hong Kong is unlikely to raise greater public attention around FEA's cause, and its current non-profit structure is not suitable for a franchising model. Lastly, the expansion in the Philippines is a good idea, but would not address the root cause of the issues targeted by FEA. So instead, we would like to propose another 2 strategies. Our first strategy is fair for all. as in to balance and address the interests of the three key stakeholders: the employers, the workers, the agencies. So in order to achieve these, we would like to recharacterize agencies' relationship with domestic workers, such as a talent agent, which provides continuous support instead of one-off matching and placing service. And the training period for the workers will be expected to prolong for more in-depth skill training and allow the agency to better understand the workers and thus allow them to identify suitable matches between workers and potential employers as per employer requirements. Based on FEA surveys, 70% of employers have indicated their willingness to pay premiums for domestic workers without placement debt and the subsequent negative impact which it has on job performance. So in order to align the interests of the three key stakeholders, a higher fee will be negotiated with employers, of which 1% of the worker's annual salary will be charged as a service fee. To better align the agency's financial incentives with finding the ideal match between worker and employer. To justify this fee, the agency will seek to negotiate better contracts at 10% premium to market rates, based on the superior matching service of FEA and subject to regulatory changes, the additional flexibility to trial domestic workers on a temporary basis on loan from FEA's Fair Clean initiative. To domestic workers, they will be guaranteed placement with FEA through depending on timeline required either with employer of FEA cleaners, higher salary when matched through FEA, and better welfare covers various aspects, including mental health care, consultations, backup job, regular checkups to ensure the health and happiness at workplace with 1% monthly fee deducted from salary paid to FEA as agent fee. To the agency, there will be a new source of regular revenue and to the financial incentives to ensure long-lasting relationship between domestic workers with current employers. And our second strategy will be a little bit more aggressive as to support FEA's vision of reinventing the domestic helper agency model. Fair Clean is the creation of a new subsidiary of FEA, which can further support domestic helpers in Hong Kong. This strategy is designed to eliminate the issue we have identified, which enable the exploitation of domestic workers in Hong Kong, which is in fact the employment visas are bound to the employers, the household, and the current misalignment of stakeholders' interests. So the main aim of this subsidiary are to provide visas, housing, and stable alternative source of income for domestic workers. A key aspect of this strategy is convincing the government to change visa regulation for domestic workers. As the current process traps some workers in abusive working environment due to the visa being bound, in order to resolve this issue, more allowance must be given to domestic workers to allow them to either work in other premises or to allow FEA to contract out domestic workers on a short term, then to transfer the visa to the employers. This would not only improve the current situation for employers, but also domestic workers and also the related social and ethnic issues. Ultimately, allowing FEA's model to outcompete other employment agencies through superior practice. The idea behind this subsidiary Fair Clean is to offer contract cleaning service for residents, companies, and private schools. It can start by looking into secure cleaning contracts with existing partners who have already signed the fair hiring pledge. This offering makes FEA the most attractive employment agency for domestic helpers, as they can gain guaranteed employment with greater efficiency compared to other potential employers before shifting to a traditional foreign domestic helper role. The challenging aspect of this strategy is that it requires exemption from the Immigration Department to allow FEA to hire foreign domestic helpers and use them as contract workers. We expect that the government will be willing to support this program. Firstly, because FEA is a non-profit and the profits generated will be to further support other domestic workers, which the government has always been hoping to do. Secondly, many international bodies, such as the US State Department and MNC International, have already criticized Hong Kong's laws surrounding domestic workers, which enable trafficking and continued abuse. As such, we expect the willingness of the government to adjust its law and regulations to prevent potential sanctions, which ties into the third point, the actual importance of domestic workers in Hong Kong as a key factor which enables many Hong Kong single income families and ensure that workers are still willing to come to Hong Kong in the future. As such, we expect that government will be willing to adjust its law to improve the treatment and working conditions for domestic workers in Hong Kong, and at the end, to reconstruct the industry. Now, I would like to pass it to Adrian for financial projection.
Thank you, Yo-Yo. So the strategies we have chosen are centered around targeting two main challenges faced by FEA, which we believe must be addressed in order to truly generate change for this issue in Hong Kong and throughout Asia. Firstly is to help FEA generate further profits, which can be used to market FEA services and to aid its expansions in the Philippines and around Asia. Second is to generate sufficient public interest so as to garner support from various stakeholders, especially large corporations and governments. And in terms of the financial projections for our first strategy, Fair for All, we are trying to create a stronger support system for the foreign domestic workers who choose to come to Hong Kong for work. This entails building a talent agent relationship whereby FEA will seek to build a stronger relationship with the domestic workers to identify the skills and qualities which they have that may be desired by potential employers. A post-hiring care system which aims to provide consultations and other services to ensure that the workers are in safe and healthy environments. And after the proper regulatory approvals, we will seek to provide job insurance in the form of positions and salary from the proposed subsidiary Fair Clean. And based on the assumption that a 10% higher salary can be negotiated for the workers, which is at 5.5 thousand Hong Kong dollars per month, helping to place 1,000 workers annually based on the figures provided by FEA, and a 1% agent fee in the base case. This represents 990,000 Hong Kong dollars annually in additional revenue for FEA. While for the domestic worker, this is only a 660 Hong Kong dollar per year cost, covering post-hire support and job insurance. This job security is a critical component in preventing workers from becoming trapped in toxic environments and forced to stay as a result of employment visas and lack of alternatives. As for costs, we assume that 3 employees would be required to be hired to act as relationship managers to cover the post-hire support of domestic workers, which is a total fixed cost of 360,000 Hong Kong dollars, which we can see in the projected profits for the various scenarios. As for the second financial projection for Fair Clean, we first looked at the potential revenues which could be generated by a contract cleaning service based on 100 workers which will be hired into the service, earning 100 Hong Kong dollars per hour, in the base case working 6 hours, 5 days a week, generating 14.4 million Hong Kong dollars annually, the majority of which will be earmarked to cover living costs and salaries for the domestic workers to support their coming to Hong Kong. And with living costs assumed at youth hostel prices of $200 per bed per day, coming to $7.2 million annually without government and NGO support. And also the salaries which we project at 5,000 Hong Kong dollars a month for a total of 12 million Hong Kong dollars a year in costs. And moving on to the implementation timelines. So first of all, for Fair for All, first, we must hire new staff to manage the post-hiring relationships. And second of all is to implement a social media marketing campaign such that both employers and potential domestic helpers are aware of the offerings of FEA. And this will take place between at the start of implementation throughout to T3, and the background checks and skill training, which will ensure that FEA is better able to match the skills and qualities of domestic workers with those of employers per their requirements. This will be throughout the whole process of the implementation. And lastly, from T2 to between T5, we will be conducting the matching process between workers and employers. And moving on to the second implementation timeline. What we have is the majority of time will be spent, and the greatest importance is to seek support from government and various charities. So this is mainly support in two forms. First of all is to support the housing costs, which we already assume that are fully paid for by the program. But obviously, if support can be gained, then these costs can be significantly lowered or even taken to zero. It would really help the revenue generation to be turned into actual tangible benefits, which can be to use to further FEA's cause. And between T0 and for the government side, we were looking to actually change some of the regulations which have limited or affected domestic workers negatively in the past. And second of all is to negotiate partnerships for long-term housing. This could be primarily done through the existing Fair Hiring Pledge, which FEA has shown to have strong relationships with various large international corporates, including Credit Suisse, Thomson Reuters, and etc. And from T1 to T3, this is to then negotiate those partnerships offering cleaning services so that the revenue streams can really be locked down such that the workers always have a place to come should employment fall through or should they need employment immediately. And lastly is obviously to market the new placement opportunities and cleaning services to the community. And now I'll pass the time to Tony, who will be sharing some of the risks that we find for these two strategies.
Thank you, Adrian. For the risks, we identified two main risk factors that would significantly affect our first strategy, Fair for All. The first risk arises if higher salary terms are unable to be negotiated. This risk may decrease the number of employers utilizing FEA services, or the willingness of workers to use or pay FEA's agent fees. However, this risk is ranked low in probability, as employers have indicated their willingness to pay premiums for workers without placement debt. And we believe they would also be willing to pay more for a better matched worker and the optionality of a trial period. The second risk is foreign domestic workers being unwilling to pay the agent's fee. It is a risk that will seriously affect our strategy, as agent's fee is the only revenue stream of this strategy. But this risk is also ranked low in probability, as the benefits offered by our strategy to foreign domestic workers far outweigh the cost. And for the risk we identified for our second strategy, Fair Clean, the first risk is lack of government or NGO support, which is the difficulty which may be faced in gaining support from charities and governments, which will cause us to be unable to lower costs and gain necessary regulatory approval for employment visa. And the second risk is partnership with corporates and the government. Inability to secure cleaning contracts with large companies or the government will adversely affect our proposed strategy, as these partners can offer large long-term contracts, without which the strategy will instead require identifying individual households to sign up for services to generate optimal level of revenue. Ultimately, it increasing the operational complexity of our strategies.
So in conclusion, we think that the strategies we have proposed will significantly allow the various stakeholders' interests to become aligned and also of the financial interests.
Provide post-hiring support and job security to domestic helpers.
An increased and diversified revenue stream can strengthen FEA's position as a market leader.
And to outcompete other firms and redefine the existing out-of-date business model, and thus to reconstruct the industry, and ultimately to achieve the goal of the future is fair. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. It is now time for the Q&A session. Let's hear the first question. Thank you.
So one of the questions I'd written down was your new stream of revenue, which is a 1% surcharge. Do you foresee any collection challenges? How would you operationalize that?
So in terms of operationalizing that it will come in the form of a contract that will be signed with the domestic worker as they sign on to be clients of us before we start the whole job searching process. So one of the key functions one of the key factors for FEA is to ensure perfect transparency in terms of all the costs that those workers and employers will incur, such that everyone is very sure on what they have to pay, where in the past, other employment agencies had many hidden costs that they would then force onto whether the employer or the domestic helpers, which would cause future problems. So we do not foresee that there will be actually any risks in terms of collecting this fee, as we will ensure that they understand that it must be paid and why they're paying it and the benefits that they receive for paying it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Have you factored in the cost of collection? Because transfer of money is still not free, so there will be a cost of collection linked to that.
Well, we believe that actually the cost of collecting the 1% should not be really should not be a lot, because we always the organization has been providing in the placement service, so they has already a system to collect the fee, and then we take into consider that we are going to hire more staff to help implement and to collect the monthly fee.
Okay.
What strategies did you consider, but you ruled out or you decided not to go forward with, and why?
Excuse me, may you repeat the question again?
Yeah, sure. So when you were considering what strategies to pursue, were there any strategies that you thought about but you decided that actually they wouldn't work? And if that was the case, what were those strategies?
Well, actually, at first we would prefer we are going to supply the housing units ourselves. But after calculating the cost and everything, we find out that it would take quite a lot of cost and time to fully implement, that we can sell sufficient ourselves to provide the housing units and so on. But we do believe our second strategy, after a good operations for probably a few years, that we are going to be able to support this by ourselves.
And within the case itself, there was 3 strategies actually proposed by FEA that we considered and decided to forego for the moment. So the first of which was the expansion of other branches of employment agencies in Hong Kong. So the reason that we thought that this would not be feasible is because it does not actually spread the message, or people who are not previously aware of FEA's offerings or why they were performing such services would have no reason to choose these other agencies over the existing ones, which have the placement debt and all those other issues. And second of all is actually this only generates further demand side from employers rather than supply side. And the second strategy actually proposed by FEA is a franchising model where they would expand throughout Asia using a franchising model, which we also felt was not particularly feasible, as Fair Clean's model is entirely profit-free and does not actually bring any benefits for its founders. So unless there was a franchisee who was particularly passionate about this issue, we saw no reason to franchise the existing model to franchisees. And last of which is the expansion in Philippines, which we thought is a good idea. But we wanted to further enhance or to ensure that the structural issues in Hong Kong were addressed or looked at before we then introduced further supply towards Hong Kong.
Thank you for answering that question. Did you factor in for most domestic helpers, when they sign a contract, it's a guaranteed source of income for a period of time, normally 12, 18 months. However, in your second model, if it's done where you're looking at contract cleaning, etc., are you saying FEA will guarantee those salaries even if they don't necessarily have contracts? And has that been factored into the financial planning?
Yeah, so it's really based on how we can really change the existing FDH contracts. But the whole idea of fair cleaning is not to supply them with an extremely long-term contract, but rather we expect to hold them for periods of between 3 to 6 months before we can then transition them to the existing FDH contracts of the 12 to 18 months, which you mentioned. And the reason for doing so is to offer this additional financial stability, such that the reason that they become trapped in those existing situations and accept abuse is because they're locked into those contracts, and the salaries that they earn in Hong Kong are so much higher than at home, where in fact that they should not be doing that. Where if we offered an alternative to help them search for another opportunity in Hong Kong with a different employer, while offering this income that would really support them in this transitioning period, would make it so that they would have no reason to remain in those abusive situations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to ask, in terms of the plan to lobby the government in terms of the visa policy, what's your plan on that?
You mean to gaining their support into the adjust of the visa?
Yep.
Yeah, because like we noticed that actually the root cause of a lot of abuse case and also all the placement debt is actually due to the living policy now currently in Hong Kong, and because of it has been going for quite some years, and Hong Kong government has also achieved a lot of pressures. And then we do believe if the root cause is not properly addressed, the circumstance is not improved, eventually the domestic helpers, they will not choose Hong Kong as a market to come to work for us, and ultimately affect our whole economy. So we believe that government will support us because our proposal is feasible and is a long-term reinvestment of the whole industry and the structure.
Well, just a little bit adding on Yo-Yo's point, because Hong Kong has been known for its reputable status, like the human rights and the freedom of work, freedom of employment, while the Hong Kong is generally considered as an oasis of human rights in the region. So it is believed that we can gain a full support from the government. So especially when the current situation is pretty severe, and a lot of the domestic workers are underpaid, exploited, or subjected to human rights violations. So this is a concern that we can gain from the.
And we think that foreign domestic workers has a large population group in Hong Kong. It's about 400,000, mentioned in the case appendix. So by exercising our business model, it can bring a great social value and social inclusion, which is benefit to the whole Hong Kong environment and the government.
Can we properly answer your question?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I had a question related to provision of housing, because in here what I heard was you would have about 100 domestic workers on the payrolls and you'd be providing housing for them or hostel accommodation.
Yes, we are going.
One of the two.
We would like to seek partnership with government or the Jockey Club, as actually they have been providing quite a lot of migrant and housing units in Hong Kong. And actually, we do not our case, when we are calculating our cost, we do not expect that they're going to give us any probably subsidies or discounts. So we already take into account that we calculate that there will be $150 per bed, and actually per night. And actually, this is based on the market data. Yes. So
my question was, is that going to be a limiting factor for future growth?
Oh, actually,
availability of accommodation.
Actually, no.
Yeah, it's a potential limiting factors in terms of how many beds that we can actually secure in those youth hostels. That's correct. So yeah, at some point as it scales up, we may need to build our own facilities or look at how other organizations or the government may be willing to support the program. And it could follow the same model that Singapore has been using for its migrant housing to support the construction workers. And this is something that would be quite worthwhile for the government to do in terms of how much of GDP that these domestic workers actually contribute to Hong Kong in terms of supporting the dual income families.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You made reference to employers willing to pay a premium for identification of workers or matching. How is that matching process going to evolve to help justify that increased fee?
Yeah, so I think that as many of you may have experienced, or even myself, there's often a lot of friction in between a family and its domestic workers in terms of when they're hiring, like the way that a household wants things to be done in a particular way, the types of food that they enjoy eating, the people that they would need to be caring for, whether it be young children or the elderly. So these are the types of requirements in addition to, the length of contract, how long they would be willing to work at a location, that we would try to fulfill those requirements from the employer's end. So ability to cook, taking care of elderly and young children. Like those are the types of requirements we were really looking to match between the employer and the domestic helpers.
Yes, and a little bit add on, as we are going to prolong the training session, which will allow the agency to better understand the workers, because we ourselves have domestic helpers. I think sometimes when you have to have a helper at home, you must have your personality must match too. So sometimes the employer, they will look for probably a more talkative helpers, or probably more it really depends on the personality. So by prolonging a training session, it can also help to, like Adrian have said, better develop their skills, and then we understand what strength they have and weakness, so that on the profile, when we are doing the matchings, we are not only relying on the paperwork, on the documents, but we have our own analysis, which we believe that it can help raise a successful matching rate.
And also from the implementation of our strategy, we'll do a background check of those foreign domestic workers that we hired. So we believe that this can, and by reducing the placement depth of the foreign domestic workers, we believe this can reduce the ethical problems, because sometimes you may heard from the news that some domestic workers will steal things from the employers, that we believe our strategies can reduce this situation.
And also the trial period is also a significant process of our matching procedure, as the employers can have a see on that whether the domestic worker can really fit their needs and requirements.
So my final question is, so if this strategy is going to work, what will be the next potential move for the company? So if our second strategy doesn't work? Yeah, I mean, in terms of implementation of this strategy that you recommended, say given 2-3 years, it really works out, what would be the next move for the company?
So an ideal situation where if everything is very successful, it will either have expanded to the point where it will be very viable to expand into other markets, such as Singapore, which also has a very large domestic worker population, or then to look at whether the model will be successfully implemented by other employment agencies throughout other industries, and a potential other industry to look at that also has a lot of abuse and mistreatment is the construction worker with construction workers, and this is also an issue in Hong Kong. So these are two potential routes for expansion, which would be able to, really significantly make an impact on the way that labor forces are hired and their treatment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you all. The judges will now stay in the room for deliberation. Dear team, we will place you in the waiting room and bring you back in for the feedback session in 8 minutes time. Everyone else, please kindly leave the room, and we will see you later for the results announcement. Thank you.
Thank you so much.